This is the first in the video series for our DIY propane fire pit. We wanted to make it look like it was made out of concrete without having to do a special pour. The other goal here was to keep it as much as possible all out of recycled materials, things that we already had sitting around. So you can take a look at some of the sides of the box here, pretty weathered. That probably would have been sitting outside for a while, but it's still good. One requirement was to have the propane bottle sitting underneath. We didn't want hoses running across our deck. So that meant we had to size the firebox appropriately. Now in hindsight, the firebox was too deep. We should have used 1x2s to make the sides out of. We'll just cut these sides down a little bit less. They were about 4 inches wide. It doesn't even need to be half that, really. We chose the size of the firebox to be as big as possible, keeping with the requirement that the propane tank has to fit underneath. That's where this size came from. We wanted it to look symmetrical and be large enough that we could see it and use it for roasting marshmallows, but it really just had to keep out of the way of that propane tank. Again, there were no plans, so we're just tracing everything rather than measuring. It really does make things go a lot faster if you're not too picky about the size, and we certainly didn't intend on making another one of these, so this method worked just fine and really did help speed things along. So here we're mounting the firebox for the final time. And then just going to check underneath here for clearance. And it was hard to get the bottle in, but it did fit. Now we've got to cover the outside in lath, which is just expanded metal to help the stucco stick. It would stick initially to the bare wood, but once it's dry it would crumble off very easily. And here I'm using roofing nails. They'll poke through because they're longer than the wood is thick, but nobody's going to be on the inside, so it doesn't really matter. So what we're doing here is measuring out the concrete die. We just happen to be using white stucco since the gray wasn't available, and actually we're trying to get the gray stucco color. Measuring it out so that we can replicate it, since we know that I'm going to need several batches to color it. We're doing a brown coat first, but what's actually going to be the same color as the color coat, just in case we have any showing through. That way I don't really have to worry about it. It's all the same. Probably the hardest part was keeping all this flat. You'd think it would be easy starting with a flat surface, but the corners tend to build up a lot. I eventually found that using a straight edge to flatten it out throughout the process helped get rid of that. I found that a little bit too late, though. I already had some built up corners that couldn't be made perfect again. And so this is the color coat, the final coat, which we're trying to get as smooth as possible. And it's just a process of applying and smoothing and applying and smoothing and just constantly reviewing it. And I had to keep wetting it with a fine mist because I was working in really bright sunlight. And eventually what you end up with is quite smooth. And you just vary the pressure on the trowel to get that smooth finish.